Pakiramdam, sensing the other beyond words can be quite irritating sometimes. It's when mom tells you she doesn't need help after you asked her, "Do you need help, mom?" And she said no. And then when you turn your back, you're curious the whole day why she's lukewarm with you, like really irritated. Today, we'll talk about pakiramdam. What is it? Why do we use it? And how we can easily misunderstand each other by using island communication in American soil. Stick around. Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak in love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Rowan, licensed psychotherapist mom, immigrant twice, first generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kapeng barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. Hello everyone, welcome to the Pinoy Love Language podcast. Rowan here, and so today we're talking about pakiramdam, which is sensing the other, absent of words or beyond words. Before we delve into pakiramdam, let's begin first with the core value of what we call kapwa. We hear this a lot. This is a core value by Virgilio Enriquez, and it's basically the merging of I and you to we, and so it's seeing the other as you see yourself and vice versa. So when you look at the other person, you see a part of yourself in that person and vice versa. To give you an example, if you have, for instance, a kid and this kid has been wanting to go, let's say, on a Mickey Mouse Ferris wheel, right? And then as a parent, maybe you're struggling, you don't have the money to go to Disneyland. And so the kid has been pleading, "Mommy, please, for my birthday." And you keep delaying that because you don't have the money for it. And then eventually you get to save enough money. And so you surprise your kid. And finally you take him to Disneyland and he was just ecstatic. His heartbeat is beating so loudly. And even if you don't get in that same Mickey Mouse Ferris wheel, just seeing his face, the beaming of his face, it almost makes you feel like you're actually riding that same Mickey Mouse ride. So, in a way, that's the essence of kapwa. It's like really when you do something for someone, it's almost like it's being done unto you. It sounds religious, but that's the definition in a more down to earth way that I could explain it. So, in the Filipino culture, that is the trunk. If you have a tree, that's the trunk of our Filipino core value. Next to that is the pakiramdam, is one of the sort of like sub Filipino core value. It would be difficult to understand pakiramdam without really understanding kapwa. So I wanted to make sure I explain that first. So if we're so connected, right? If you are my kapwa, the question with pakiramdam, which is sensing the other absent of words, is can you sense me? If you can imagine a signage without words, it is indeed still a signage. It's just that there are no words. Now, pakiramdam is something that is honed. Okay? You're not born like just knowing to sense your mom, to sense your uncle, and vice versa. There's a lot of cultural teaching that occur so that a child can learn this. But You hear this often, and especially in conversations in the islands. If someone's gonna go visit a relative, maybe they are in need, maybe they need to borrow money. Well, they usually do, let's say the parent is giving advice to the daughter who's going to ask a rich uncle. The father would say, just tell him this is our scenario, that I lost my job. And then the daughter might ask, do I ask him? How much would I ask him? The father might say, no, you don't have to ask him. Alam na niya yon. So you often hear, alam na niya yon, meaning they already know. If you tell them stories, if you sort of like leave already cues, they already should be able to sense, at least that's the expectation, through pakiramdam, that you are actually needing help, asking for favor, asking to borrow money. Obviously, this only works when you have deep relationship with that other person. In a different episode, I'll talk more about this concept of hindi ibang tao and ibang tao, cultural insiders and cultural outsiders, and how that truly makes a difference in this usage. If you have visitors from the States, if you visit the Philippines and you have a relative you haven't seen in a while, even though your family, it really depends on them if they see you as kapalagayang loob. They can show themselves in the most natural state, right? And they're not just being hospitable. So that's how you know when you are now a cultural insider. It's beyond the person just simply being hospitable. Now that takes relationship building. But let me just go back to pakiramdam. So that sense of they already know. Okay, that again, the premise is that person and you will have a relationship that is deeper, not just acquaintances, not just friends, but they sort of like can read your body language, if you will. So always the question with pakiramdam is if we're connected, if we are kapwa, right? Can you sense me? Now, the challenge in America is that cultural teachers are scarce. Okay. I like to call this cultural whisperers. So in the Philippines, we use the word tagapamagitan. These are cultural teachers or whisperers, and usually it's not even an assigned role. It's basically you just do it, you just know how to kind of like do it. For example, if you have an uncle who knows you well and your mom, and there's some seems to be some misunderstanding with you, between you and your mom, an uncle might be the tagapamagitan, the cultural whisperer, who might convey messages to you like, you know what, your mom looks really upset, but what she really needs is that you talk to her. So the tagapamagitan or the cultural whisperer have different roles, but they sometimes might give guidelines, recommendation, convey messages that the other party might not be privy upon. In another episode, I'll break down a little bit more of the role of these cultural interpreters. But what I want you to just understand is that they're everywhere. They could be teachers, actual teachers in school, even kabarkadas, like close friends, are those whisperers. Oh, your mom probably just meant this. They're always explaining or giving light to the story so that you have an explanation. Now, I see this often when I'm doing also family therapy with immigrant parents and then their children. There's really a difficulty with channeling what the parent wants to convey, and the Filipino American child or an adult is really having difficulty really reading those cues, and it does really make sense, and it's painful to watch because when you talk and you're able to be that cultural whisperer as the therapist, that's kind of like my role, then you break down what the parent really wanted to convey. And also the same for the Filipino kids, American kids, right? They only want to be validated, acknowledged. And usually the Filipino immigrant simply wants to know that they're not going to be forgotten, and that it's not so much that they're wanting their children to be burdened, even though their narrative seems to be communicating that, because there's a misattuning to these verbal or affection cues. So one does not know how to communicate, and the other one is taking it in a different light. This is vice versa. So this feedback loop just keeps happening. And you can just imagine what happens in that Filipino family, the dynamics, right? If you keep saying something, if someone's speaking another language and you don't understand that language, for example, if someone speaks German and you're trying to speak to them in English and you feel like you're not understood, you might scream and shout and stomp, and it's not going to do any good except if you learn how to also speak their language, so that then you can understand them and then you can convey what you really want to say. That's usually just how we can really bridge this intergenerational gap that keeps happening in our Filipino homes. In my world, learning each other's love languages is really a one way to bridge that gap when it comes to this intergenerational communication gap that we have in our Filipino homes. So we'll talk more. Just a quick break. Stick around. Dyan ka lang. Don't forget that the 5 Pinoy Love Language ebook is available now. This ebook is easy to digest but gives you an understanding of the unique ways Filipinos express love, deepening your cultural identity and understanding, but ultimately understanding you in your Filipinx relationship. Check out the links in the show notes. Welcome back. Let's continue our conversation on pakiramdam. I did say that there is a way to learn this skill, to hone this skill. The researcher, anthropologist, Dr. Magay, did say that this is quite a difficult feat. And in her opinion, it takes many, many years to be a cultural insider. I was really appreciative of her work, but also it's a challenge for me. I am constantly thinking about, but how about the Filipino Americans, right? Like, not everyone can go back home and stay there for many years. So I took it upon me to be this cultural whisperer so that we can really bridge our relationships here in our American soil. So, how do we learn this? One recommendation is to learn the language, whether it's a dialect or it's Tagalog. And don't feel bad if you only speak a few words or none at all. That's okay. You can start today. The reason for that is there's so many hidden gems in our language. Just an example, the word na and pa. So many people complain that Filipinos are not very observant when it comes to time. Like, we don't RSVP. We usually have this quote and unquote Filipino time. You'll see or be given a bit of a clue by using our language, learning our language, that Filipinos are not focused on the middle. So they're really just focused on what's happening now, or it's almost happening, or it already occurred, right? So when you say wala pa, it's not there yet. Okay, so they'll probably do something else, or wala na, it's done. I don't know if you've ever experienced where Filipinos would actually call when there's a party. Are they there na? They're like asking, are people already there? One of the reasons that anthropologists give us is that there's a lot of changes that occurs in the Philippine setting geographically, and our government, and just life, right? And that Filipinos need to be flexible to survive that type of location, that type of culture. And part of our survival is to really be flexible, to not be so focused on scheduling. That would be stressful for a Filipino because you can't even control traffic. Imagine if you have the checklist that we have here in our American soil, like go to the library, fetch the kids, do grocery. In the Philippine setting, you can only do what you can do because there's many things that you cannot control. And so language gives sort of this microscopic understanding in some nuances in our culture. Also, when you think about the way we respond, right? So easy in English. If you ask someone yes or no, they just say yes or no. But in our language, there's so many in between, right? It's like we can say oo, hindi, siguro, marahil, tignan ko, and there's so many more in between that. So learn the language. And then, secondly, if you have, let's say, it's your dad and he is suddenly quiet and you know there's something wrong, of course, and it's healthy to ask open ended questions, but they like to be interpreted. It's so opposite, right? In the American culture, we want to ask, is there something wrong? But if we even interpret, that seems like you're sensing the person even more. For example, if you know dad is acting weird, he's unusually quiet, if you say, I think you're mad, did I do something wrong? So you're already interpreting his change in behavior, and that makes him feel good because you're sensing him. So that's interpreting. Obviously, if you're not sure, open at least open-ended questions are always useful. So the third one might sound a bit weird, especially from a psychotherapist like me, is to watch soap opera or teleserie, but you watch it like a researcher. Get a notepad, observe people, how do they convey their messages. Now, they are obviously a hyperbole, right? There's a lot of exaggerated characteristics and expressions. Just know that before you watch. But there's a lot of things that you can learn, just how people respond. Because if it's not relatable, people will not be watching teleserie, right? If it's not speaking to them, to their own story. So there's something to that. So simply observe it like a researcher. And then finally, take a class. Take a master class. We do have a master class on Pakiramdam. Check that out. Check out other people's courses if there are out there, and just explore. So let me just do a quick recap. But before I do that, I also want to share there's a free webinar called Speak the Pinoy Love Language. There I talk about nuances in the culture, difference in the way we communicate. Check it out. It's free. You can watch it on demand, and the link is in the show notes. So let's recap. Pakiramdam is something that can be honed. We can practice this. We can learn this. Obviously, we all have to be patient because it is a process. Pakiramdam is sensing. And when you're sensing someone, you're using basically your senses, your sense of sight, touch, feel, everything. It's really being attuned to the other person. Pakiramdam is, for me, one of the big reason, if not the one that's causing this intergenerational gap. It's difficult to really read cues when there are not enough cultural whispers. These people, their gems are scarce in the American culture, and that's why we have this podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm your cultural whisperer. I hope I'm serving you well. So for now, that's the end of our episode. Thank you so much for listening. If this is helpful to you, don't forget to leave a stellar review and share this podcast to your friends. Take care now. Sa ulitin. Bye-bye.